fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren.
Heard on KCAA 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery, and I'm your host today, Al Warren. Back up today is Mr. David Baseball Martino.
How you doing, Al?
I'm doing good. How's the karate going?
It's going great.
Yeah?
I just had another video do very well.
Yeah?
Well,
YouTube, that's great. Well, see, we'll call you Daddy Karate or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
I have to figure out something because coming up with a key name, you know, you're getting all this attention. I know. You'll be a star.
Yeah.
You'll be leaving the show. You'll be doing your own, The Karate Kid Part 8.
Oh, there we go.
You know, you'll take over for him. You'll be Ralph Macchio. Be Dave Macchio. That's your name, Dave Macchio.
Dave Macchio. Okay.
Yeah. See, we're getting. I'm lining you up. You know.
Perfect.
You're going to be the star. Anyway, well, now today we are going to be talking about a new book called Tesla, Wizard at War, and we're going to talk about with the author. And Dave, that's not the Tesla car. Okay.
No. The
band. So not the band. So don't ask any questions like that. So Mr. Marc J. Seifer, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So Marc, I noticed just looking through this, that this is the second time you've written about Tesla, and I kind of wonder what the interest was for you to go back and actually do another book.
Tesla's a fascinating topic. Everybody, hones in on the war of the currents between Tesla and Edison, which is an amazing story, how he lit the Chicago World's Fair and then had gained the right through Westinghouse to launch the hydroelectric power system, beating Edison in the war of the currents. But the thing about Tesla is he gets more and more interesting as you go through his entire life. And although Wizard, The Life and Times of Nikola Tesla covers his whole life, there was still some mysteries left. And those are the mysteries I wanted to explore in the new book, Wizard at War. So that was really what happened. He just continues to fascinate me.
Well, he's an interesting character. So now for people that don't know much or anything about Tesla, because there's always listeners that are new to this, what's the basic thing that Tesla is known for?
I think he's known for, as I mentioned, the hydroelectric power system. And one thing about it and the induction motor, it's a clean energy, renewable source of power. So he's, through the hydroelectric power system, which was put in at Niagara Falls, he wiped out 3,000 little local coal-operating power stations, and he could run factories in the forest, whereas before him, those of us who live, in the Northeast, all the factories in those days were along rivers. You had to be very close to the power source. So after Tesla came in, you no longer had to be close to the power source. And also, it was clean energy. It did not pollute the earth, and it did not sap the earth of its natural elements, such as oil and coal. That's his first major accomplishment. His second major accomplishment, he really is the inventor of wireless communication and cell phone technology, the ability to create an unlimited number of wireless channels. All of that was invented around 1900. Marconi is the name that people know because Marconi succeeded in the marketplace, and Tesla ran into big problems with J.P. Morgan when he built this huge tower out on Long Island, which I do get into in Wizard at War. But I think those are the two most important inventions of his: hydroelectric power system, induction motor, and wireless communication.
His name also tends to bring a little bit of controversy as well. There's some people that say some not very nice things about him. Is there a particular reason you think that happens?
There's a lot of reasons. One is professional jealousy. When I first got into this way back in 1976, I wanted to figure out who the heck was Tesla. I know he was involved in alternating current. So the first book I got in the library at the University of Rhode Island down in the basement, 1897, written by Charles Steinmetz, all on the alternating current system, Tesla's name isn't in the book. It wasn't until a year or so later that I realized what Steinmetz had done would be like writing a book on the theory of relativity and somehow forgetting to put Einstein's name into the book. That's what he did. And the reason he did was he was working for General Electric, and they were competing against Westinghouse. So you had a whole group of people that it was not to their financial benefit to raise Tesla's, accolades, because they themselves had competing inventions. That was one of the big reasons. And another reason, this is the House of Mystery, he thought he had received pulse frequencies from Mars, from the Martians, which in 1899. And he wrote an article called Talking with the Planets. So he started to become a fringe person, particularly when his wireless system no longer was working because he ran out of money. So he was linked to the occult. His name was kept alive in the occult. And in fact, I was teaching parapsychology. My first books that I got on Tesla were from UFO organizations. So those are the two main reasons: political, financial jealousy, and also that he was far out in his beliefs that maybe he was contacted by extraterrestrials.
Do you think that's why we never heard, at least I didn't, hear about Tesla like when I was in school? We would hear about Edison and we'd hear about Marconi, but Tesla was never brought up.
Yes, but his name was also purposely buried. People that knew him well, I mentioned Charles Steinmetz, who was very famous for General Electric. Michael Pupin, who taught at Columbia University for many years in the physics department, buried his name in a book that won a Pulitzer Prize. And different writers purposely kept his name out of those reasons, the economic reasons. So that was it. But also, we tend not to remember people who come in second, and we don't even remember the names of inventors. I do not know who invented contact lenses. I know that Velcro was invented by a guy he saw the burrs in the forest, but I don't know his name. So we often don't know the names of people. We know the names of the corporations. We don't know the guy who invented the mouse. We know Stephen Jobs. Stephen Jobs did not invent the mouse. So there's a number of reasons why his name disappeared. But those are some of the reasons why.
So now I noticed this book, you call it The Wizard at War, and you're kind of focusing on some of the other aspects of Tesla. So what are the main or primary focuses in this book about Tesla?
Well, there were three major wars that Tesla was involved in. The first was the Spanish-American War, which is 1898. And he had invented by that time a remote control robot. And this robot, it's a boat, it's like a submarine boat, had two aerials. And he was combining frequencies even back then. That is the basis of cell phone technology, selective tuning, radio guidance systems. And he felt that if every country had a remote control torpedo, that no country would invade another country by the sea because the torpedo would explode and destroy the ship. And Mark Twain was really interested in that invention. And there's a letter I cover in the book when Mark Twain was in Europe dealing with the Tsar of Russia and other people. He wanted to sell Tesla's remote control robot to these people. And he asked Tesla, if he can do this. So that's the first major war. The second major war is World War I, and the third war is, of course, World War II. In World War I, Tesla's actually working for the Germans before we got into the war. And the Germans actually had the best wireless systems, better than Marconi's. So the U.S. Navy had German wireless systems on their naval ships, which was perfectly okay because we were a neutral country. And the Germans had hired Tesla because they knew that they'd actually pirated Tesla's apparatus. The Kaiser allowed any German citizen to use, inventions from anybody without paying royalties to anybody. So that was their way of paying him back. They hired him. And then Marconi had the guts the chutzpah, to sue the U.S. Navy and to sue Telefunken for patent infringement. But the truth of the matter was that Tesla's invention of the radio predated Marconi's. And since Franklin Roosevelt was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, he went into research, and there's a letter that he writes where he says, let's use Tesla's patents over Marconi when Marconi sues us. So that was a very interesting story that I cover in the book, when Marconi actually comes to New York to this big, giant a lawsuit which took place in Brooklyn, and he comes in on the Lusitania in 1915, and then the war gets heated up, and he leaves under an assumed name under a hidden on another ship, and the Germans sink the Lusitania. So there's a question as to whether or not they were actually trying to murder Marconi as part of the reason why they sunk the Lusitania in 1915. So I get into all that in World War One, and in World War II, I get into Tesla's invention of the particle beam weapon. I think one of the biggest things that I found in writing this book, you have this image, those of us who know Tesla, of this old man in Bryant Park next to the New York Public Library feeding the pigeons, and that's all true. But he was not this doddering old poor guy just withering away. He was negotiating with the very heights of power in the onset to and during World War II. And I have documents which establish that Tesla was negotiating with Joseph Stalin, with General McNaughton, who was the head of secret weapons development for the Canadian government, third in line to be the head of Allied forces behind Eisenhower and Mountbatten. That's who McNaughton was. There's a lot of letters between them. McNaughton was the right arm of Winston Churchill. And also, I have a letter signed by Franklin Roosevelt as president wanting to meet Tesla because he's interested in the particle beam weapon. And basically, I set up the idea that there were two major weapons here, the nuclear bomb, and which is Einstein's, coming from Einstein, and Tesla's particle beam weapon. And Franklin Roosevelt is deciding which way should we go. Do we need the particle beam weapon to protect us in case the Germans get the atom bomb and fly a nuclear bomb over, and we need this weapon which can shoot down airplanes? So those are the three major wars and the three major inventions that I deal with: the remote control torpedo boat, wireless communication, and also the particle beam weapon in these three wars.
What was his dealings with Joseph Stalin then?
Well, in 1934, Joseph Stalin, through the Ontag Trading Corporation, was trading with Ford and General Motors and many American companies, and we were helping them. We were giving them grain because they were starving there. So it was perfectly okay, but I think it was a little dicey that Tesla was selling them a secret weapon, and he did indeed sell it. And I cover that in Wizard, my first book, and I knew he got $25,000. What I did not know until I got the second book, working on the second book, and got letters that were declassified from the Soviet Union, that Joseph Stalin himself had to sign off on the payment of $25,000. Now, $25,000 in those days, I'm old enough to remember when you could buy, a Hershey bar for a nickel. But in the 1930s, you could feed a whole family for under $1. So $25,000 in those days was easily worth $500,000 or more in today's dollars. And so it was a lot of money, and Stalin himself okayed the transfer of the funds to get the details of the weapon. So that was his link to Stalin.
Now, did he actually work for Edison?
Yes, he worked for Edison in 1884. In fact, he worked for him in 1883 in Paris. And I discovered a trip that Edison took to Paris that's never been written about before, which I cover in the first book, Wizard. And he loved Edison. Edison was the Napoleon of invention. He wanted to go to New York and work for the Wizard of Menlo Park. And he's got this new invention, the alternating current invention. And Edison is battling against Westinghouse. Edison was a DC man. Westinghouse was an AC man. And Edison just didn't believe in AC, and he didn't want to hear anything about it. So Tesla, said, well, let me fix your DC equipment. I can, improve it by 15 or 20%. And Edison said, boy, if you could do that, there's $50,000 in it for you. And then Tesla goes ahead and does it, and he really expects Edison to pay him $50,000. So he leaves in a huff when Edison says, I was kidding. I mean, this is America. It's an American joke. I wasn't going to pay you $50,000 for that, but I thank you very much. So there was a dispute between the two of them. And then later they reconcile. What I found out in 1895, when Tesla's laboratory burned to the ground, Edison lent him laboratory space in New Jersey until Tesla could get his own laboratory. So they were enemies for a while, and then later they were friends.
Wow. Well, so what do we know about his personal life? Like, did he sort of have good relationships with other people, or what happened with him?
You know, one of the reasons I was so interested in Tesla, he moves into the Waldorf Astoria at the height of the Gilded Age, in the 1890s, the gay 90s. He's friends with John Jacob Astor, who owns the Waldorf. He's the largest landowner in New York City. He's friends with Robert Underwood Johnson, who's the editor of Century Magazine, which was like Life magazine for us when we were kids, or now, you know, all the different shows that you can watch on cable or whatever. But everyone got the Century Magazine. It was the magazine of the day. It was what we have today as television. They had these major magazines. And his wife, Katherine Johnson. He was friends with Mark Twain and Rudyard Kipling. He was friends with all of these stars of the Gilded Age. So that's one of the things that intrigued me about him. And one of his closest friends was Stanford White. Stanford White was the architect who built the original Madison Square Garden, the arch in Greenwich Village, and many churches and Penn Station. And eventually he comes to design Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower. So where Stanford White was a Lothario with many women, he slept with Evelyn Nesbit when she was 16 years old. She was the Floridora Gibson girl of the day. Tesla was celibate. He didn't have sexual relations with anybody, and there's a question whether or not he had homosexual tendencies. That may or may not be true, but he was friends with men and women and claimed that he was celibate his entire life. So there's a mystery about his intimate personal life, but I cover in this new book his link to people that he'd never been linked to before. He was close friends with Tiffany, Louis Comfort Tiffany. He was friends with Theodore Dreiser, the author, friends with William Randolph Hearst. Citizen Kane, the movie that Orson Welles did, was about Hearst. And I cover that, and he's a friend with Daisy Gordon, who was a socialite from the turn of the century. So he's fascinating that he's friends with many interesting men and women, many of them historical giants in their own right. But his sexual life is mysterious because, indeed, he claimed that he was celibate, that he transferred all of his sexual energy, transformed it into invention. He was inventing really the new age.
Well, all super intelligent people are homosexual. Come on. Now, I also heard that he only slept 2 hours a day or a night.
He claimed it. He claimed that, every once or twice a year, he'd have a deep sleep of 4 or 5 hours. Genetically, he was unusual. He had eidetic imagery where he could envision the inventions and run them in his head. And there was a great myth that that's all he did. And when they found the Colorado Springs notebooks, he has mathematical equations that'll make your head spin. I mean, I was a math major in high school, in advanced math classes, and I can't do the math of the kind of stuff that he was doing. And they didn't want to publish his Colorado notebook because they wanted the myth that he did everything in his head. And Alexander Marincin, she was the head of the museum, said, no, this makes him greater. He did a lot in his head, but he also worked it out on paper. So Colorado Springs notebook is available, and it's got all these incredible mathematics, and it's all these wireless calculations. And at this time, in 1899, Marconi doesn't even know how to create 2 channels. He's not even sure what frequency he's using. And Tesla's multiplying frequencies, telling J.P. Morgan, I can create an unlimited number of wireless channels, and you see all the math behind it. He's so far ahead technologically from anybody else of the day.
Wow. What surprised you, with his friends or people? What ones sort of surprised you the most?
I think the biggest surprise I found, and I lucked out, was locating that he was good friends or associated with General Andrew McNaughton, who was the head of secret weapons development for the Canadian government and thus really for the British Empire. There were a lot of letters between the two of them. Who the heck is Andrew McNaughton? I never heard of the guy. So I do a little research. He's on the cover of Life magazine. He's on the cover of Time magazine. He's third in line to be head of Allied forces. This is a big deal that Tesla's negotiating with the head of secret weapons development for the British Empire, trying to help them protect against a German invasion. That was the biggest surprise for me. And I got real interested in McNaughton because it was a guy I never heard of. And he's literally flying down or taking the train down to meet with Vannevar Bush, who's the head of the Manhattan Project and secret weapons development for the American government, and President Roosevelt. So he's at the top echelon, and Tesla's negotiating with the very echelon of power of the Allied forces as Germany, starts to build up and become almost impregnable in the early part of World War II.
Well, did he, with his weapons like the particle beam, which I believe was called Teleforce, did he actually sell any of those and actually have them developed? Did anyone ever develop and use them?
It's a great question. He really did sell the details to the Russians for $25,000 and tried to help them out. I think he gave the details to the British government through Andrew McNaughton. McNaughton sent physicists to meet with Tesla at the Hotel New Yorker, and he definitely gave all the details to the American government. I spoke with Ralph Bergstresser. He's no longer on the planet, but Bergstresser was the last person to see Tesla alive, and Bergstresser was working for Franklin Roosevelt and the War Department. He was, in the military. He would meet with Tesla at his hotel, the Hotel New Yorker, and Tesla would give him the details of the particle beam weapon, and then he would microfilm them, and he'd give the papers back to Tesla, and all that is covered in the book. But you're asking, did he ever build a particle beam weapon? And I don't think he ever built a large one. He probably built small prototypes, but even then, he had run out of money early in his life. By the 1905, 1906, he was really struggling to make do. And it's hard to establish whether he actually built an actual particle beam weapon, but he worked out all the details to a great extreme. And I think, we spent, in today's dollars, $1 trillion to build the atom bomb. I think you had to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to build the particle beam weapon. Today's railgun is based on all the principles of Tesla's particle beam weapon. So we do have a military weapon clearly based on it, but this is 50-something years later. So you're asking a great question, Dave, about it, and it's one of the mysteries that's not totally solved.
Right. Was he religious?
That's a great question, too. His father was a priest, and in 1917, he's offered the Edison Medal. He doesn't want to get a medal from Edison. And so one of his buddies says, well, who do you want it to get? You want Charles Steinmetz to get your medal? So he agrees and he accepts the Edison Medal. And he talks about that that there's something beyond this world and that he's working for the future. So he does have a spiritual side to him, but he's very materialistic too. I mean, for him, the soul was almost like Pavlov's dogs, rewards and punishment inside the brain. So part of him is very mystical, and another part of him is the exact opposite of being mystical. But he grew up with a father being, a Greek Orthodox priest, so he certainly had the spiritual background. And he was interested in different religions, too. I found a letter that he wrote to Lord Kelvin. He had given him a book on the great initiates, Moses, the different Indian gods, Confucius, and all those. He did study all those kinds of people. So he definitely was interested in all those areas.
And so what kind of a person was he, do you think, as well? What was he positive with society at the time? Was he where do you think he sat as far as his lifestyle?
I think he was an elitist. He also had a tremendous altruistic side. He did rip up a royalty contract with Westinghouse, which was worth in today's dollars billions of dollars, to help him win the War of the Currents. And he really wanted to serve humanity. But he also, he had mixed feelings about Roosevelt. He was against the New Deal. And so he, in that sense, was a bit of an elitist, but he also had a great sense of humor. One of my favorite letters that he writes to Katherine Johnson was he's going to meet Rudyard Kipling for dinner. And he says, "What's the matter with ink spiller Kipling? He dared to invite me to this crazy hotel where I was sure to find hair and cockroaches in the soup." So, you just have to laugh. I mean, he had a great sense of humor. And he was, with the upper echelon. But I think in that sense, and, he had a lot of workers that worked for him too. But there was this elitist side to him, and he was a bit of a megalomaniac. He really did want to control the entire planet with his wireless system. And it's unfortunate that he ran out of money, because I think we would have had wireless cell phones in the early 1900s had Morgan given him the money to succeed. But his personality is very complicated. He was friends with many men and many women. He liked to go to plays. He liked to see comedies, the movies, when movies came out. He was really, a bon vivant.
Yeah, if we had cell phones that early, do you think wouldn't it have just, the human race would have went nuts, wouldn't it?
We're learning that now with the internet, for sure. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because 100 years ago it was even more naive in a sense, right? So I could imagine what would have happened and how the wars would have turned out. How would Hitler have dealt with a cell phone?
I know. Well, look at Putin right now, Yeah. I mean, the Russians, do they know what's going on? I mean, or even in China, Tiananmen Square, how do you hide all these things even now with all the great access that we have? It's a really interesting question. I think that it would have been a lot harder for Hitler to have succeeded with the Holocaust had Tesla succeeded with his wireless system. I have always felt that.
Yeah, certainly, because there'd be more people aware of it, and I wonder if we'd have their version of Alex Jones back then too. All sorts of stories then.
Yeah, there's a good possibility there.
Yeah, Alec I. Jones. Yeah. So at the end of the day, when someone picks up this book, what is it you hope that they take away from it?
I think. I got a lot of letters from kids. They do their scientific assignments on Tesla, and a lot of them win the award. Tesla is such an incredibly fascinating guy. The last chapter of the book deals with Tesla's dynamic theory of gravity. You just keep learning from him. I didn't know what gravity was. I know you jump up, you land back down because you're attracted to the earth. That's what I thought. Tesla's view of gravity was very different. Tesla said that all matter is absorbing energy all of the time. And the reason we fall back to the earth is not because we're attracted to the earth, but because we're in the way of the influx. And so he resurrects the importance of the ether, and he's got a different view of what the God particle is. The God particle is the particle that gives matter its mass. And I think his dynamic theory of gravity bears looking into. So I think what you take away from is that he's so fascinating that you see that the war of the currents with Tesla and Edison, although an incredibly great story is just one story, that his life really gets more and more interesting and amazing the more you study it. I've literally been studying his life for 40 years. I'm still getting documents emailed to me all the time. I got these Russian documents declassified because this fellow saw me on the Tesla Files, a TV show. We did a 5-part limited series. So people from all over the world have been sending me information. And so I think that's it. Study a great thinker. Study Einstein. Study Leonardo da Vinci. Study these great thinkers. I think that's really the takeaway, that Tesla constantly gives you more because he's so fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. I mean, America needs to study people that, to look up to like that, not Kim Kardashian. Sorry, Kim, but, well, so what was the biggest surprise you ever had, going through research, and when you get different documents sent to you and stuff like that? Was there ever something that just sort of made you freeze in your tracks?
Yeah, actually, I'll tell you the opposite story. I know in 1894, Mark Twain came to Tesla's laboratory. So I was out in California. I was working on my doctorate. I didn't go to Berkeley for my doctorate. I was at Seifer But I went to Berkeley to do research, and I'm in the library, and they said, we have all of the letters and all the private diaries of Mark Twain. I said, you have all of them? They said, yeah. I said, you mean you have 1894? Oh, yeah. You mean you have April of 1894? And they say, and my heart is like beating, out of my chest. And I get there and I open up and nothing, not a thing is mentioned about Tesla at all in there. So that was the opposite. So I had, a couple of real dead ends that I hit, and that was one of the most amazing ones. But I mentioned before, General McNaughton was to me one of the greatest finds that I found recently. And also another big find that I found, which I think was a great find, was I found a real link between Vannevar Bush and Nikola Tesla. There's a great book, called The Makings of the Atom Bomb. Vannevar Bush was the head of secret weapons development for the United States during World War II for the Manhattan Project. And in 1931, Tesla was 75 years old, and a lot of Nobel Prize winners wrote him a letter. And one guy from MIT wrote him a letter. And in the book that I have has all the letters, they couldn't read the signature because it was illegible and there was no name typed at the top. And I realized that the scribble was Vannevar Bush. So in 1931, Vannevar Bush sent Tesla a happy birthday letter. And then later, right after he dies, Bush sends John G. Trump in to look at Tesla's papers. Trump worked for MIT. Turned out Trump was Donald Trump's uncle, his father's brother. And the Trump report, which I had for 30 years, I knew Donald Trump. I grew up in New York, but I didn't, just thought it was the same name. I had no idea that they were so closely related. So those are some of the most fascinating things I found, was the real tie between Vannevar Bush, the head of the Manhattan Project, and Nikola Tesla, and also that that President Trump's uncle was the guy who studied Tesla's papers after Tesla died. And basically he said, don't worry about it. There's nothing of importance in here. You can send them to the communist country of Yugoslavia. And there was another group that I uncovered, headed by General L.C. Craigie, who was the first person to fly a jet plane during World War II, kind of the Chuck Yeager of the day, or the John Glenn of the day. But it was all done in secret. So I uncovered this kind of a battle between two people in military intelligence, two groups. One group putting Tesla down, saying, there's nothing to the particle weapon, don't worry about it. And another group from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base says, what are you, nuts? We got to keep these papers. And so they kept them for 10 years. And they discovered another invention, which was very important, which becomes the Osprey helicopter airplane. Tesla had a patent on that. So those are some of the fascinating things that really stood out in my research in the new book.
Well, that's pretty interesting. How was he brought up by his parents, or what was his childhood like?
He grew up on a small farm. I was there in Smiljan. It's about 150 miles from Rome as the crow flies, but that's across the Adriatic Sea. And it's along a plain, and way in the distance you can see the Dinaric Alps. And I think he must have seen lightning storms in the Alps, traveling across the plain to his little church and house. And his father was a priest. The church was right next to the house. And he had an older brother that everyone looked up to, Dane Tesla, who was as intelligent as Tesla. He was 7 years older than Tesla. So he had to be the favorite son because he'd been around for 7 years before the new kid grew up. And when Tesla was 5, Dane died in a terrible accident with an Arabian steed. He fell off the horse, broke his neck, and he died. And so he grew up, with this horrible tragedy, but he also grew up learning how to improve his memory. They memorized entire Serbian ballads, whole passages from the Bible. He knew Faust by heart. He knew 9 different languages. He was part of the educated elite. His mother was from the family that had the regional bishop. So it was a very religious group. And he's also a Serb. The Serbs are this own little group. The Jews have their group, the Catholics have their group, the Kurds have their group. The Serbs are their own little group. They're wonderful people with their own, religion, or it's a form of Christian religion. But they talk about Kosovo, the Battle of Kosovo, which played a huge role in Tesla's psyche. It took place in 1389. The Ottoman hordes were going to march through Europe, and they would behead all the men, they would rape all the women, and convert all of them to the Muslim religion. It was not a good time. And in 1389, the Serbs stopped this Ottoman horde from taking over, but they lost their kingdom at the same time. And what I learned from one Serb, Dr. Markovic, he said the Battle of Kosovo hangs over our head like the death of Jesus Christ for the Christians, or the flight of the Jews out of Egypt for the Jews. That's how important it is. And it played a huge role. So Tesla was very aware of war. He saw war. He saw heads on stakes, the horribleness of war when he was a young man. And he built this particle beam weapon. He said it's actually a peace weapon, it's kind of the mutual assured destruction concept. He felt if everyone had this powerful particle beam weapon, you'd have to be crazy to invade another country, because this particle beam, this death ray, would just knock out your army, so you'd never do it. So it was an odd, complicated, contradictory concept that you have this huge weapon which would stop war. But the reason has to do with his background and his realization of how terrible war was. It's it's very complicated. It's complicated. I don't know how else to say it.
Well, I guess he also really hated that the media kind of dubbed the particle beam the death beam instead of the peace beam, which he liked to call it. Yeah,
he called it a peace ray, but it was a death ray. I mean, you have to trust. I mean, you guys know this, but there was a discussion of using tactical nuclear weapons during the Second Iraq War. My head was spinning when I read that. That they were actually considering that. I'm sure Putin is considering it right now. So it's not the weapon, it's who's in charge of all that. Who's going to be in charge of these weapons, and what's their head at?
Yeah, it's always worrisome. Why do you think he sort of started getting into occult and UFOs and that sort of part of the world? Like, what drew him into there?
I think there were two major reasons. One, he believed in the plurality of worlds. They have this new telescope out in the sky. I don't know the name of it, but I've seen the pictures of all the spiral galaxies, the spiral, clusters of spiral galaxies. It takes 100,000 years for light traveling at 186,000 miles a second to get from one end of the Milky Way to the other end. I mean, that's just our little spiral galaxy. So he knew there had to be life elsewhere in the universe. That's the plurality of worlds concept. But at the same time, there was a tremendous belief in life on Mars. And the belief was, as we were, becoming from an agrarian society to the modern age, that there was another planet ahead of us, that they were, irrigating their entire planet. And Percival Lowell had a huge telescope out in Flagstaff, Arizona. His brother was the president of Harvard University. And Percival Lowell told us that these are the canals of Mars. I photographed them. Here are the drawings. I have to enhance them a little. And the Martians are ready for us. We're about to be ready to be welcomed into this, extraterrestrial community. So there were many people who believed in life on Mars. And even today, even this very day, there are articles that maybe there's life on Mars. Maybe there's fungus or some type of growth that's growing on Mars. So it was part of the zeitgeist of the day to believe in that, War of the Worlds, H.G. Wells. And look what happened when Orson Welles made a radio show out of it. He created a panic. So subconsciously, we all believe that there's got to be life elsewhere. And he felt once he received these pulse frequencies, and I'm going to give you a sound. This is what they sound like, because I heard the Coen brothers reproduce it. It sounded like this. Beep, beep, beep. That's what he received on his machine in 1899. And he thought, well, it must be the Martians. They contacted me. We're about to enter the new age. So he got caught up in it, and then the UFO nuts got attached to him. We're now finding out that there's something to UFOs. One of the reasons I got into Tesla to begin with, I was teaching parapsychology. I was life after death, telepathy, psychokinesis, Uri Geller, and, spoon bending, all that stuff. And I didn't know where reality ended, and fantasy began. And then I learned about Tesla in 1976 when I first learned about him. And I said, wow, he's got patents. These are real patents. This guy's an actual real guy. So I kind of shifted gears away from parapsychology and study of UFOs and life after death and out-of-body experiences and all of that, traveling clairvoyance, remote viewing, and moved mostly into Tesla because I could prove for sure that he was the real deal. And then I tried to set out to see, was he really the inventor of the radio? Was he really the inventor of the hydroelectric power system? And I was astonished that I was able to establish that indeed he really is the most important inventor behind all these inventions. So that's, some of why he's linked to the occult and how I got into him, because I was linked to the occult. That's how I found out about him.
Wow. So he would have been on Coast to Coast Radio too, right?
Yeah, he would have definitely been on Coast to Coast.
George Norrie would have him on there every week.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, so now, how do people get a hold of you, find the book and everything like that? Do you have a website? Do you do social media with fans, or where do people find you?
Yeah, I have a website, markseifer.com. I didn't hide my email. I get emails all the time. Some of them are nuts and others are just great individuals. It bugs me. I don't know if it bugs you, but you try to communicate with a lot of these famous people and you can't get to them. So we live in this great age of communication, but try to contact some people and it's unbelievable. But I have two books, Wizard, the Life and Times of Nikola Tesla, which is his entire life story. It's a #1 bestseller on Amazon and USA Today and Wall Street Journal bestseller list. And the new book, which is now out in hardcover, will be released in about a week, is Tesla, Wizard at War, The Genius, the Part of Clean Weapon, and the Pursuit of Power. And that book is available at Barnes & Noble and Amazon and all bookstores. I'm truly very happy to see that the bookstores are ordering the book. It's a very easy to read. I don't know, you pick up books, there's a feel that you have. Is the book too heavy or too not? It's a light book, but there's a lot of information in it, but it's just a friendly book to hold in your hand. I'm very happy with the cover, and it's just fascinating. So yeah, so the normal inquirers, you can easily find my email on my website. But please order the book from Amazon or Barnes & Noble. That's the best way to get it.
Well, fantastic. Of course, we'll have that up on our site. People can find it with one click and get to you and stuff. Did Tesla like Einstein?
No.
Is that like a rivalry kind of feel, or was it just he didn't like him as a person? What do you think?
I think, I honestly think he was jealous that Einstein was getting all the press, and he thought the theory of relativity was just crazy. He didn't believe in that. He wrote that, look, I've split atoms. I never saw any release of a tremendous amount of energy. It's all baloney. It's all theoretical baloney that Einstein is spewing. And the reason why he did indeed split atoms. What he didn't do was split the nucleus. So I think it's one of the shames that he didn't get to live. He died in 1943. If he'd lived a couple more years and seen the atom bomb explode, he would have had to totally reorient his thinking. So he and I did a lot of research to see if there's any letters between them. There's only one letter. I've gone through the Einstein papers and also the Tesla papers. There's no link between them except the one letter that Einstein sent him wishing him a happy birthday in 1931. But that is a fascinating topic, that Einstein and Tesla. But there is no personal link between them, and it's Tesla's greatest mistake to have discounted Einstein's theories.
Yeah. And if it was in if we had the wireless phones, then you see, he would have been sending them hate mail.
I don't think he would have gone that far.
No, probably not. What do you think he would do with the world today, the way it's gone with all of this technology? How do you think he would have handled it? the way people behave.
I'm going to blow your mind and tell you what he would have done. He was selling ozone generators. He invented an ozone generator in 1896, patented it, and he was selling it to a medical community. And I got into ozone therapy. I've written a new book called Ozone Therapy for the Treatment of Viruses, which will be out in March. And to my utter astonishment, ozone therapy kills viruses. That's what it does. And he knew that. He talked about the medical advantages. They didn't know what viruses were until about 1920. But this whole pandemic was caused by the FDA and the FTC blocking the ozone therapists, who are wonderful medical doctors all throughout the country and literally throughout the world, that are killing the COVID virus left, right, and every which way. I've written to every one of the, Fauci and Birx and Dr. J.H.A., I don't know how to pronounce his last name, and Dr. Walensky, President of the United States, Vice President, every senator and congressman you can think of, telling them that ozone therapy will kill the ozone virus, the COVID virus. And what you do is, if you Google ozone, out pops a notice from the FDA that ozone is a toxic gas with no medical application. I'll tell that to the 50 years of research of all these medical doctors are finding that it's killing viruses left and right, and also the ozone layer. Without the ozone layer, there'd be no life on the planet. If that's not a medical advantage, I don't know what is. So that's what I think he'd be doing. I think he'd be selling ozone generators, and he would have stopped this pandemic before it ever started.
Well, why do the medical community and stuff like that ignore things like this? Like, people like Fauci, or not even picking on him, but why would the FDA or CDC and stuff like that, and president and all these people, why do they ignore this?
We alluded to this before, and I don't want to get into a political discussion at all. But we know in Russia that the Russians think that Putin's a hero, and we know he's not. And we know in China that they don't know anything about Tiananmen Square. There's stuff happening in America. I want to avoid a political discussion, but
right.
There's it's hypnotized by the media. Google ozone, and out pops this message by the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, and they have blocked. I have the warning letter that they've actually sent to medical doctors that have been ozone therapists for 30 years, saying, if you dare advertise that you can cure the COVID virus, we will shut you down. I have the letters which said that. And I have sent letters to New York Times, the Washington Post, LA Times, you name it, Time Magazine, to the editors-in-chief of all these places. They've all refused to do anything about this. I don't know the answer. I've tried to contact 60 Minutes, Frontline. It is astonishing, but when you really get into it, and don't believe me, what you need to do is Google Ryan King, RHIAN KANG, in the Abizan, which is a newspaper in Ibiza, Spain, and look up ozone therapy and Dr. Hernandez, and you will find in April of 2020, which was just a couple of months after this pandemic started, Dr. Hernandez says, I was going to put my patients on ventilators, but I gave them ozone therapy, and in just a few sessions, the results have been spectacular. He followed up with research that he did. He gave ozone therapy to 9 patients, randomly chosen, and the other 9, they were the COVID patients. The 9 who had ozone therapy were out of the hospital in 7 days. The other 9 who had COVID were out in 28 days. I sent all that information to doctors, medical doctors, to the higher-ups, government leaders, governors, Gavin Newsom, and in New York, and on and on. And they've ignored it. Ron Klain, I've sent him stuff. He was involved in the Ebola crisis. Had Ebola spread like COVID, that would have been the end of the world, when in fact a treatment existed which can knock out the Ebola virus as well. That's how powerful this is. And Tesla was selling ozone generators at the turn of the century. He knew all, the beneficial effects of this way back when. So it's because of Tesla that I learned all about this. And my new book, Ozone Therapy, which will be out in March, is co-written by 4 medical doctors.
Wow. Well, we'll look forward to that. Well, it's been a good conversation. We appreciate you being on the show, and it's a very interesting subject. And we've been talking about Tesla and the new book, Tesla, Wizard at War, and that's by our guest called Marc J. Seifer. So thank you for coming on the show.
Alan, thank you for having me. Michael, thank you for having me. I mean, David, thank you for having me. It's been a great pleasure to be on here, and I look forward to hopefully speaking with you again.
Thanks, Mark.
Tired of wasting time trying to decide what to watch on your streaming service? Go to our website and look for the Martino movie reviews.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or show, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.